SoundCartel.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. There may be a cost of living crisis, but tipping in Australia is skyrocketing. Restaurant tips have increased by nearly 50% in just 2 years. Wes Lambert, CEO of the Australian Restaurant and Café Association, argues that government should treat tips as tax-free windfalls. Wes explains the changing situation and where he gets his figures to Jeff Waters.
Tipping. Well, it seems like Australia does have a tipping culture. According to Zeller, which just released its second report, so we have one from last year and we have one from this year, shows that tips have increased by 26% from 2 years ago, and again 25% from last year. So tips are up nearly 50% on the average restaurant bill in just 2 years. They've gone from $16 on average to $25 on average. It's really a surprise to us. We did in accommodation food service, we'd estimated that Australians and tourists to Australia tip between 3 and 5% on average. That's in every business in accommodation food service. But it looks like in restaurants specifically that it's much more than that and closer to 7%.
Wes, how is this possible in the middle of a cost of living crisis?
You know, we ask ourselves the same question. And also with the ABS showing us that international tourism remains down 10+% from pre-COVID levels. What it seems like is those people that are dining out are rewarding that extra good service in the restaurants that they're going to.
Just extraordinary. Are there any other reasons that you can think of?
Oh, look, wages are up across the board, especially in hospitality, where we've seen 15+% in 2.5 years, including award rate increases and increases in superannuation. And so, look, it was a bit of a surprise to us. And in our pre-budget submission, which we have sent to the Treasurer, we are asking the Australian government to actually remove tax on tips. We believe that those are windfalls, and many Australians will be surprised to learn that the ATO requires hospitality workers to declare that as cash income on their tax returns and pay tax on it.
Let's get back to the tax in a minute. But before we do that, I wanted to ask a question from the perspective of a small restaurant or cafe owner. Do these tips go, or should they go, to the owner or the business, or are they dedicated entirely to the staff member?
It's a great question. In Australia, there is no specific common law or legislation that says that tips belong to employees or workers. However, with almost exact certainty, nearly, if not 100% of hospitality businesses pass those on to their employees. Employees know that gratuities and tips are paid, especially when they are pooling tips, which is most cases. And so ultimately, those are passed on. And the ATO has two rules. If they, for example, are part of an invoice, so oftentimes an invoice for an event might include a service fee. If it's non-voluntary, it is part of supply and so therefore is subject to GST. And so that stays within the business as revenue. And then those businesses then pay the net amount out to their employees. But for all voluntary tips, those are not supplied to the business and then just pass on to the employees. It used to be that employees would get a cash envelope from their, the cafe or restaurant or pub or club or hotel where they worked. Now there are multiple options for those to be paid digitally, including Arca Partner on the Money that allows businesses to pay tips and gratuities to their employees through an app, through a digital MasterCard that can even be used at ATMs.
Wow, terrific. You mentioned tax several times there, and you said that the Australian government actually requires waiters and wait staff to declare their tips. Surely that doesn't happen.
Oh, look, it is a criminal offence to not declare cash tips. So it is actually now on par with wage underpayments, intentional wage underpayments, because you're intentionally choosing not to declare tips. Now, ultimately, we think that tips are a windfall. They are voluntary, meaning that for hospitality employees, there's no expectation that they're going to be tipped. It doesn't form part of their wage like it does in other jurisdictions. It is just extra income. It is not even supposed to be reported on their payslip or their group certificate. It is cash income that's reported separately. And so what we're doing is calling on the Australian government to make it official that tips are like lottery winnings, which are a windfall. They're like punting winnings when you bet on sports, a windfall. They're like a gift that's given to you by anyone who gives you a gift up to a certain amount. It's a windfall. And so even though they are received because you work in that hospitality business, because they are not a part of the goods or services or anything that you are provided as a customer, you're just choosing to reward someone for really good service, that's a windfall. And we believe that it should not be taxed.
So does that include pooled tipping?
Yeah, ultimately what happens is pooled tips then get paid out individually. So each individual then takes a percentage of the pool, let's say based upon the number of hours that they worked or the shifts that they worked. There are lots of ways to calculate what each individual would get in gratuities.
To ask what may be considered by some a controversial question, at a time when many restaurants and cafes are struggling financially and trying to stay afloat, and there's this money, this extra 25% that you were talking about earlier being thrown around, offered at the cafes and restaurants to staff, is there any way that the business could benefit from this?
Oh, look, ultimately we say no. It's 7%, according to Zeller, in restaurants at the moment. The tip amount that they're recording through their POS data is 7% of revenue, which is a 25% increase from last year, which was up 26% from the year before. Ultimately, no. Gratuities belong to the staff, and there are lots of venues around Australia where there is an expectation. Some of the most premium restaurants in the country, some of which that I used to own some years ago, service staff in many cases make between $600 and $800 a week in gratuities.
Okay, just to close then, Wes, how is hospitality doing? How's the industry going and faring at the moment?
It's a great question, Jeff, and it's a great question on the back of recently released CPI data. While there are lots of CPI numbers being thrown around, whether it's trim mean or headline or otherwise, what we know is that restaurant meals are still up 2.7% from last year, which means consumers are still paying more than they were a year ago. And also, when we think about inflation, we think about it as year over year. But when you look at inflation over time, restaurant menu prices are up in many cases 30 to 40% from pre-COVID levels, because inflation is really, it's measured on from a point in time that we say a month before or a year before. But what about 2 years before or 3 or 4 or 5 years ago? So in 5 years, we've had quite a sharp increase in menu prices as those businesses have been hit with some of the sharpest increases in costs and wages and expenses. Even in the most recent CPI data, there were multiple items in double digits, including insurance and utilities. And so those type of sharp increases to rents and wages and other input costs have meant that restaurants and cafes and hospitality businesses around Australia have had to continue to put their prices up.
That was Wes Lambert, CEO of the Australian Restaurant and Café Association. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow @BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel.